Hello, it's Friday morning and you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Trump accuses Iran of doing a very poor job over oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Russia announces Orthodox Easter temporary ceasefire. And US First Lady Melania Trump strongly denies any links to Jeffrey Epstein. First this morning, tensions are rising again between the United States and Iran, with new accusations over the Strait of Hormuz. The dispute comes days before the planned peace talks in Pakistan.
A lot of people are affected by this.
US President Donald Trump has accused Iran of failing to uphold its commitments under a fragile ceasefire, saying Tehran is doing a very poor job of allowing oil shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. He also warned that oil would begin flowing again, with or without Iran's cooperation, and cautioned against any attempt to charge vessels for passage. Earlier, Iran insisted the strait remains open but subject to wartime conditions, requiring coordination with its military for safe passage.
Those technical restrictions are very much connected to the wartime condition, and it takes time to be removed. So safe passage is secured. Strait of Hormuz is open, but of course, each tankers and each vessel should make necessary arrangements with the Iranian authorities to be able to securely pass the strait.
At the same time, a statement attributed to Iran's leadership signaled a tougher approach, saying management of the Strait of Hormuz would enter a new phase, while also warning of retaliation and demands for compensation following the war. NATO has also weighed in, with allies discussing possible support to secure the route and ensure freedom of navigation.
Nearly without exception, allies are doing everything the United States is asking. They have heard and are responding to President Trump's requests. The United Kingdom is leading a coalition of countries that are aligning the military, the political and the economic tools that will be required to ensure free passage through the Strait of Hormuz.
Iran, meanwhile, has linked the continued restrictions to ongoing Israeli strikes on Lebanon, which it says violate the ceasefire and undermine diplomatic efforts. Despite the rising tensions, both sides are preparing for negotiations in Pakistan, where officials hope to stabilize the situation and prevent further disruption to global energy supplies.
The third party, in this case Pakistan, is no longer just simply passing messages. It's also trying to convince the other sides, or at least one side. And I think that it started out with the Americans asking the Pakistani government, particularly Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, and more importantly, Field Marshal Asim Munir, the Chief of Defense Forces.
Analysts say Pakistan's role has shifted from a go-between to an active mediator, with success potentially boosting its diplomatic standing, but failure risking further instability in the region.
Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to New York Times website and the issue around Iran and Lebanon ceasefire. Now, as you heard in the first report, there's a number of different things going on, but Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says there is no ceasefire in Lebanon, and it's something that we have been reporting since the ceasefire took place 2 days ago. Netanyahu says that they will continue to strike Hezbollah with force, and Iranian officials have called the strikes, the latest ones against Lebanon, a violation of the ceasefire. That's what Iran has said. Now, Donald Trump says that Israel and Lebanon's conflict is a separate skirmish that he's not necessarily involved in. Now, we now know that Netanyahu said he had told his government to start direct talks with Lebanon as soon as possible, and those talks were aimed at disarming Hezbollah and establishing peace peaceful relations. As you can see from the pictures, this is just some of the devastations in Beirut. As we can see there, just a lot of airstrikes and a lot of people injured. Now, a US State Department official confirmed it would be hosting hosting a meeting next week with Israel and Hezbollah to discuss ongoing ceasefire negotiations. However, Lebanese officials say the talks may or may not begin just because strikes still continue, and they're really hoping that it will stop very soon. Now, the death toll from the Israeli strikes on Lebanon on Wednesday has increased to more than 300 people, and that's according to the country's health ministry, with over 1,000 wounded. Now, in relation to the Strait of Hormuz, which is what the report actually highlighted, Trump says Iran's handling of it is very poor. He's not very happy with it, and he says that they best not be charging ships to pass through the key waterway as well. Now, we know that Hormuz stood at well below the 10% of normal volumes on Thursday, despite the ceasefire, with just 7 ships passing through the strait in the past 24 hours versus 140 ships that is normally passed through that time and date. Well, we'll keep you more up to date where we have more stories in and around this particular topic, as you can imagine. Now we'll go to the next story, and that's on the BBC, and that's in relation to the First Lady, US First Lady Melania Trump, who denies ties to Jeffrey Epstein and urges hearing for survivors. So what we know is that she has denied connections to Jeffrey Epstein. She told reporters at the White House on Thursday that any claims linking the two need to end today. So this was actually a surprise announcement on Thursday that many weren't really expecting. Now, and the First Lady called for the congressional hearings for survivors of the Epstein sex trafficking case. She also denied online rumors that Epstein introduced her to Donald Trump, calling them mean-spirited attempts to defame her reputation, as well as what she was saying. We're kind of unclear what actually prompted this particular announcement. However, she has said that she's not been a victim of Epstein, with whom she said she only briefly crossed paths in 2000. And her words were, "I have never had any knowledge of Epstein abuse of his victims," is what she said, and was never involved in any capacity and was not a participant. She also denied knowing Ghislaine Maxwell, the disgraced finances jailed associate. Now, why do we think this is coming out? So what you can see here, there's an email coming up here, and she referred to this email in 2002 between her and Maxwell, which was released in the Epstein files, calling it nothing more than casual correspondence and a polite reply. But in the actual email, it sounds like they were friends, but she's saying it was just a polite reply, and this is where the main announcement of her address is coming from. So, but we'll keep you up to date in regards to that. As we know, there are calls for Bill Gates to speak, and as well for President Trump and a number of people who are linked but of no wrongdoing in relation to the Epstein files. Earlier this year, we know that Bill Clinton and his wife Hillary Clinton also was able to give a congressional hearing in relation to this. They were also they didn't have any wrongdoing attached to them either. Now let's go to the next story, which is on CNN, and that's in relation to Artemis II, which is actually heading back to Earth. Now, get caught up in the Artemis II crew's journey to the moon, what's happened so far and what's next. Now, the mission is now heading back towards Earth, with 4 astronauts having travelled around the far side of the moon and gone further into space than any human has travelled before. Now, the journey marks the first time humans have left Earth orbit since 1972 with Apollo 17 mission. And I'm just going to bring you some information in relation to that so you can see it on the screen. Now, it also represents the first time an African-American astronaut and a woman astronaut and a non-American astronaut respectively have ventured this far into the solar system, into the moon. Now, on day 1, which is coming up, we can see that the spacecraft Orion travelled from low to high Earth orbit, and I'm just going to show you what that actually looked like as well. Remaining rocket parts separate from the spacecraft. Crew executes docking demo. Oh, here we are. So this was day 1. Day 1 was them lifting off and going from low to high to Earth's orbit. So that was day 1. Let's click to day 2 to 5. Now, day 2 to 5 was Orion. So as you can see, that orange line there, just leaving Earth even more. Fire set it on a path to the moon. Crew tests communications through the deep space network. Spacework enters the lunar sphere of influence. So there we are, them nearly approaching the moon. And then we go to day 6, which was a crucial day. And the lunar flyby and observation begins. begins. So there we are, when they go just around the furthest part away from the Earth and around the moon. Orion makes the closest approach to the moon. Mission reaches maximum distance from the Earth. And then day 7 to 10 is where we are at now. So Orion begins its return journey, completing an unprecedented flight figure 8 pass, as you can see there, heading all the way back to Earth, and crew will conduct a manual piloting demo, spacecraft maneuvers towards re-entry to Earth and a splashdown, which is what we're all waiting to see. Now, just as a reminder, this is a 10-day mission which took off on the 1st of April and marks the planned return of humans to the moon as well. I'm going to quickly go to the next story, which is on the BBC, and that's in relation to EU travel, which has changed. EU fingerprint and photo travel rules come into force today. What does that mean? So for EU non-travellers, EU non-citizens, fingerprints and photos alongside a passport scan is set to be fully operational from today. The entry-exit system, which is actually short for EES for short, is for all non-EU citizens travelling across the Schengen border, which covers 29 countries. The system began gradually last year, October, in order to strengthen security and make things a lot more smoother. Now, there have been reports of long queues since that time is happening, but they're trying to iron out all the little bugs as well. But what is EES? Just to let you know, it's a digital system designed to keep track of non-EU citizens, including those from the UK, enter and leave the Schengen area. And this, as I mentioned, covers 29 European countries as well, and includes popular destinations such as France, Spain, Portugal and Italy under the new system. So just so that you're aware, if you do think that you are going to be travelling there to any EU country, there is a new system in place. Well, that's your press roundup for today. Now I'm going to take a very quick break, and when I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories for the morning. Welcome back, you're watching Daybreak. Now let's take a look at the rest of the global stories. Israel is intensifying its offensive in Lebanon, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying there will be no ceasefire as strikes continue. Even as Israel signals openness to talks, Hezbollah rejects negotiations, raising fears the conflict could widen. Here's more on that report.
Israel is escalating its military campaign in Lebanon and making one thing clear: there will be no ceasefire. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Thursday that Israeli forces will continue striking Hezbollah targets until security is fully restored in the north. His statement comes just hours after a massive wave of airstrikes across Lebanon, with around 100 targets hit in a matter of minutes. Lebanese officials report more than 300 people killed and over 1,000 wounded in the latest attacks.
Following repeated appeals from the Lebanese government to enter into peace negotiations with us, last night I instructed the cabinet to open direct negotiations with Lebanon in order to achieve 2 goals. 1, the disarmament of Hezbollah. 2, a historic sustainable peace agreement between Israel and Lebanon.
But there is a major obstacle. Hezbollah has already rejected direct talks and clashes are continuing on the ground. The crisis is also spreading beyond the region. The United States and Israel say a wider ceasefire deal does not include Lebanon, while Iran insists it does, raising the risk of broader escalation. A conflict intensifying on the battlefield and a fragile path to diplomacy just beginning. Since early March, nearly 1,900 people have been killed and more than 6,000 injured, according to Lebanese officials. At the same time, a diplomatic track is emerging. Netanyahu says Israel is ready to begin direct negotiations with Lebanon, with talks expected in Washington next week. The goal is to disarm Hezbollah and move toward what he calls a historic and lasting peace.
Now, ahead of the high-stake peace talks between the US and Iran in Islamabad this weekend, Pakistan has ramped up security across its capital. We go to our correspondent Hira Mustafa, who has more on this information.
Islamabad is on high alert ahead of critical peace talks between the United States and Iran. Delegations from both countries are expected in the capital on Friday. The U.S. team will be led by Vice President J.D. Vance, while Iran's delegation is headed by Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Ghalibaf. Formal negotiations are scheduled to begin on Saturday, with Pakistan acting as the mediator between the warring parties. Officials say all eyes are on Islamabad, which is why security has been tightened across the city's red zone, home to government offices and foreign missions. The military is coordinating operations, supported by police teams and paramilitary rangers, in what authorities describe as an unprecedented security effort to avoid any untoward situation. A prominent hotel in the red zone has been vacated and reserved exclusively for the visiting delegations. Meanwhile, a US security team is already on the ground, reviewing arrangements, and high security protocols are reportedly in place for the Iranian delegation. Due to security concerns, officials have not disclosed the protocol's details. Authorities have advised residents to avoid traveling to central Islamabad over the next 2 days, as markets and businesses will remain closed on April 9th and 10th. Zones close to the administrative center of Islamabad are also seeing access restrictions. Officials say that with strong diplomatic ties to both the US and Iran, Pakistan's mediation has placed Islamabad in the global spotlight. Supported by regional powers including Turkey, Egypt and Saudi Arabia, experts say the Pakistani government now faces a tough challenge of turning a temporary ceasefire into lasting peace. Analysts say everything hinges on these talks, which could shape Middle East stability and US-Iran relations in the years to come. Hira Mustafa for A News, Islamabad.
We head to Israel now, and its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's corruption trial will restart on Sunday. That's according to a court spokesperson. The hearings were paused due to the state of emergency in Israel, which has now been lifted. Netanyahu denies all charges of bribery and fraud. He was indicted in 2019 and the trial began in 2020. Donald Trump has called for him to be pardoned, saying the court process affects his ability to govern, and has urged Israel's President Isaac Herzog to consider it. However, pardons are rarely granted while a trial is still ongoing. Netanyahu's political position has weakened in recent years and is expected to face a tough election ahead.
Does anybody recognize this man?
To the UK now, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is continuing his Gulf tour with high-level talks aimed at reinforcing the fragile ceasefire between the US and Iran. Our correspondent brings us more.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has travelled to the United Arab Emirates on Thursday, the second stop of his Gulf tour after Saudi Arabia, as efforts continue to secure the US-Iran ceasefire. In Abu Dhabi, he held fresh talks with regional defence chiefs on reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The meeting, chaired by the UK's Chief of Defence Staff, Sir Richard Knighton, included defence representatives from the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, Iraq and Egypt. Starmer told those attending that the ceasefire between the United States and Iran was welcome, but warned it remains fragile and requires continued international effort to halt. He stressed that the UK had been pushing for de-escalation throughout the conflict. Some of those attending had participated in the virtual military planning meeting chaired by Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper on Tuesday for around 40 nations to discuss how the Strait of Hormuz could be kept open after fighting is over. The Prime Minister's visit has also taken him to Bahrain, where he met British forces and again stressed that there is still work to do to secure the ceasefire and protect global energy flows. Zaina Farizadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
And it's stability that a lot of countries need after a new warning from a major regional development bank highlights growing concerns over the conflict in the Middle East and the devastating economic impact it could have across developing Asia and the Pacific.
Economic growth across developing Asia could slow sharply if the Middle East conflict drags on, with the Asian Development Bank warning the region may lose up to 1.3 percentage points of growth over the next 2 years. The warning, issued in Manila on Friday, highlights how rising tensions are already disrupting global energy supplies and weighing on economies across Asia and the Pacific. The bank says growth across 43 developing economies, including major players like China and India, as well as smaller nations such as Georgia and Samoa, is expected to ease, while inflation could rise further if the conflict continues.
The region enters this highly challenging period from a position of strength. Growth reached 5.4% and inflation eased to 3% in 2025. Even so, uncertainty remains exceptionally high. This report's key assumptions were finalized on March 10th and envisaged a conflict lasting for about 1 month.
The slowdown is being driven by instability in the Middle East, which is disrupting trade routes and energy flows. A key concern is the Strait of Hormuz, a vital oil shipping route, where any disruption could quickly push global energy prices higher. While a temporary ceasefire has been reached after weeks of fighting involving the United States, Israel, and Iran, economists caution it remains fragile. The ADB outlines different scenarios, warning that a short conflict would have a limited impact, but a prolonged crisis could significantly weaken growth and increase inflation pressures across the region.
Turning to the war in Ukraine, and Russia has announced a temporary ceasefire in Ukraine for Christian Orthodox Easter holiday. It is set to last from Saturday evening through to Sunday night. Ukraine says it will also observe the pause. The announcement comes as the two sides continue limited contacts and exchanges.
Now, an urgent message from the Kremlin. By decision of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, a ceasefire is declared from 4 p.m. on April 11th until the end of the day on April 12th.
Russia has announced a temporary ceasefire in Ukraine to mark Orthodox Easter, a 32-hour pause in fighting set to last from Saturday evening until Sunday midnight. The Kremlin says all military operations will be halted across the front, while troops remain on alert to respond to any violations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kyiv will respect the ceasefire. In a post on social media, he said Ukraine had repeatedly called for a pause in fighting during Easter and is ready for reciprocal steps. Zelensky also stressed that civilians deserve a holiday without threats and urged Russia not to resume attacks after Easter. Despite the announcement, fighting has continued in several regions. Ukrainian authorities report multiple attacks in Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia, regions with casualties, damaged homes and fires following shelling. On the diplomatic front, contacts between Moscow and Washington are continuing but largely behind closed doors. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says discussions are taking place informally and confidentially, with no clear timeline for renewed formal peace talks. Meanwhile, both sides have carried out another exchange of war dead. According to Russian sources, Moscow returned the bodies of around 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers while receiving 41 Russian servicemen in return.
A deadly incident in the English Channel has once again exposed the dangers migrants face attempting irregular crossings to the UK. New details from French authorities reveal how shifting smuggling tactics are putting lives at even greater risk. Our Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where a deadly incident in the Channel from France to Britain once again highlights the risks of irregular crossings and how smuggling networks are adapting. French authorities initially said a so-called taxi boat used by smugglers sunk off the northern coast. However, officials now say at least 4 people died after being swept away by strong currents while trying to board the inflatable dinghy. Local officials say a group of migrants waded into the water to reach the boat when things went wrong. The dinghy continued its journey toward the UK, while dozens of others were rescued in a major emergency response. The incident underscores a growing tactic used by traffickers, launching boats offshore to avoid police patrols, forcing people into the water to board, often in dangerous conditions. And there are signs the routes themselves are shifting. Smugglers are increasingly moving operations beyond northern France into Belgium as enforcement tightens along the French coast. Belgian police say at least 17 departures have already been recorded this year, a stark contrast from a maximum of 2 per year since 2021. Belgian police spokesperson Anne Burger says these networks operate in fragments, moving migrants in stages and demanding repeated payments, often under coercion, with reports of threats and abuse.
those smuggling organizations, those criminal organizations, they never take people from the country they were born in to the UK. It's always in bits and pieces, and those people are transported to one place and they have to pay extra to get another part of the transport. It's really all criminal organizations that work in little pieces. It's never an all-inclusive. It's very dangerous. There's people being threatened. There's people being abused, sexually abused. Those things are being filmed to put pressure on the families, to have them pay more money. It's a criminal world, and it's better not to get involved.
Officials warn the model is highly adaptable, with traffickers shifting routes and tactics to stay ahead of enforcement. Despite the shift, though, Belgium remains a small part of the picture, with around 41,500 crossings detected on the France-UK route last year, and more than 2,200 already in the first 2 months of this year. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now, US First Lady Melania Trump has strongly denied any links to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, calling recent claims false and defamatory. In a surprise speech at the White House, she gave her remarks denying any connection. Here's what she had to say.
I never been friends with Epstein. Donald and I were invited to the same parties as Epstein from time to time, since overlapping in social circles is common in New York City and Palm Beach. To be clear, I never had a relationship with Epstein or his accomplice, Maxwell. My email reply to Maxwell cannot be categorized as anything more than casual correspondence. My polite reply to her email doesn't amount to anything more than a trivial note. I am not Epstein's victim. Epstein did not introduce me to Donald Trump.
Now to East Asia, and China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has arrived in Pyongyang for an official visit, according to North Korean state media. Yi was welcomed at the airport by his counterpart in footage released by state media that Reuters could not independently verify. State media reported that China's foreign minister North Korea's accomplishments despite what he described as efforts by the US and Western forces to isolate the country. Now, Thailand's traditional New Year festival is usually one of the country's busiest spending periods. But this year, vendors and shoppers say higher fuel and living costs are dampening celebrations. Here's more.
Rising fuel and living costs are casting a shadow over Songkran, Thailand's traditional New Year festival, which is known for large water fights and usually ranks among the country's biggest spending periods. At Sampeng Market in Bangkok's Chinatown, shop owners say sales of water guns, a popular part of the celebrations, have dropped sharply this year.
Our sales are down a lot, so we are taking in less. Profit is lower. Last year was a lot. We are stocking less. The other merchants are not coming to buy and resell. Fuel is expensive. Lots of things are expensive. They are afraid to invest. So many problems.
Vendors say higher costs are making both traders and shoppers more cautious, with some merchants cutting stock as demand slows. The three-day holiday usually sees many people travel back to their hometowns, helping drive spending across Thailand. But this year, some say rising transport costs are keeping them from making the trip.
Transportation costs are high, travelling is difficult. Fuel prices are high. It's probably not possible to visit other townships during Songkran.
Surveys suggest Songkran spending will fall this year as many Thais cut back, and some skip celebrations to save money.
Now to South America, and Venezuela's National Assembly has confirmed Larry DeVoe as the country's new Attorney General, following the resignation of long-serving prosecutor Tariq William Saab. Deval had been serving in the role on an interim basis and previously headed the National Council of Human Rights. Lawmakers approved his appointment after reviewing more than 70 candidates, with the nomination passing by a large majority. Staying in Venezuela, clashes broke out in its capital as state workers marched to demand higher wages, but were blocked by riot police near the presidential palace. Protesters, including union members, workers and students, pushed against police lines, with some throwing objects as tensions escalated. The demonstrations reflect growing frustration over wages that have not increased since 2022. This comes a day after Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, announced on Wednesday her government would make a responsible increase to workers' income in May. Sports brand Nike has secured a deal with UEFA to redesign the iconic Champions League ball, replacing the former supplier Adidas after more than 25 years. The 4-year deal begins in 2027 and is worth $45 million a year. Adidas has held the Champions League contract since 2001, featuring a star design which mimics the Champions League logo. Nike was previously UEFA's match ball supplier between 1997 and 2001 and used simpler designs featuring the company's own trademark swoosh prominently. Now to something a little bit hot, and lava has once again flowed from the summit of Hawaii's Kilauea volcano in a striking display captured by United States Geological Survey on Thursday. The company says the eruption began in the morning local time, sending fountains of molten rock up to 625 feet, around 190 meters into the air. Kilauea is one of the world's most active volcanoes and has been erupting on and off since December 2024, with this latest episode marking its 44th lava fountain event in the current eruption cycle. You can only imagine how hot that gets. Well, over to a quick break now. When I return, I'll take a look at the regional headlines and I'll be joined by a guest to dig further into some of the key stories. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's head over to the region to find out what our key stories are. And we head first over to Azerbaijan and Armenia. Now the peace process continues to evolve amid renewed diplomatic engagement, emerging regional initiatives and intensifying political dynamics. Within Armenia domestically, Armenia is entering a decisive pre-election period where the peace agenda is increasingly intertwined with political competition and narratives of security, sovereignty and geopolitical alignment. At the same time, Armenia's relations with Russia and the question of Moscow's influence on the electoral process are coming under increasingly close scrutiny. Joining me now to discuss this is Vasef Husenov, Head of Department at the Center for Analysis of International Relations. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
My first question, if we just want to dig straight into it, is what do you think would be the desired outcome for Russia for the Armenia elections, and are we seeing hints of that coming through?
For Russia, the elections in Armenia, which are due to 7th of June, are very important milestone, particularly due to the fact that there have been some shifts in Armenia's foreign policy over the past 4 or 5 years, which are not entirely favorable to Russia. And it includes particularly the TRIP project, which Russia's foreign minister called the change of the regional balance that existed there since 200 years. So Russia is hoping that the Armenian government is going to reverse to previous pro-Russian stance in its foreign policy. And from that perspective, the parliamentary elections in Armenia offer some chance, some rebalancing in Armenia's foreign policy. And therefore, for Russia, it would be very much desirable if some forces come to power that implement pro-Russian shifts in the country's foreign policy and as well as in some matters in domestic politics. Therefore, it's clear that the present position of the Armenian government, led by Prime Minister Pashinyan, is not entirely desirable, acceptable for Russia, which is the reason why in their meeting in Moscow between Prime Minister Pashinyan and President Putin, the domestic political process of Armenia were discussed, and President Putin hinted that there are some people in Armenia who Russia favors to participate in upcoming parliamentary elections. And therefore, probably the desirable outcome for Russia would be these forces, pro-Russian groups, take power in the aftermath of the parliamentary elections.
So why do you think Russia is so threatened by the trip route corridor, and why do they feel that the foreign policy no longer favors them?
You know, from Russian perspective, it is understandable. They have been dominant in the South Caucasus since the beginning of the 19th century. And therefore, it is not coincidence that Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov referred to the early 19th century agreements between Russian Empire and Persia that it consolidated Russia's presence in the South Caucasus. The trip project is viewed as a shift in this balance and as a very serious blow to Russia's geopolitical standing in the South Caucasus, because it is for the first time that a Western actor takes foothold in so-called Russia's backyard. And the trip project is not just about infrastructure, it has very serious geopolitical implications. And therefore Russia is understandably concerned about it. But at the same time, from our perspective, we believe that Russia is exaggerating this, because President Ilham Aliyev several times explained that trip project is not going to harm Russia's interest or Iran's interest. It is a chance for regional integration in terms of connectivity projects. It offers alternatives for Russia to reach out to countries in the south, and also for Iran, it is a chance to have better access to Russia and also to Armenia.
Right. So Moscow has also consistently recognized Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan, both before and after the 6th of October 2022 Prague Declaration. Do you think that could be a sticking point for Armenia, or does it tell us something different in regards to how they view Karabakh, how Armenia is viewing it, and just moving on from the war of 2022?
Yeah, actually it was a very big surprise for us to observe that the two leaders of two different countries are sitting and talking about Azerbaijan's domestic affairs, its international recognized territory, because Karabakh conflict is no longer there. It has been resolved. It is recognized as part of Azerbaijan by all the international actors, including Russia and Armenia. Therefore, it was not understandable why President Putin referred to that conflict again, and there was sort of a game between Prime Minister Pashinyan and President Putin, who recognized Karabakh first. I mean, that's not understandable, but it is. It shows that there are certain forces who want to instrumentalize this conflict as well, or former conflict as well, to pressure against Armenia and against Prime Minister Pashinyan's position, because Pashinyan made it clear that Armenia recognized Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. Armenia is about to sign a peace treaty and to formalize this recognition. But it is clear that there are forces who want to use every possible chance to affect Armenia's ongoing electoral process and upcoming parliamentary elections. And the discussions, the references to Karabakh are also part of these efforts.
I see. And just returning to the Armenian electoral process, in the unlikely event that things do start to change and Armenia, for example, decides to refuse to sign the peace treaty and avoid the constitutional changes which are necessary, how dangerous could that be for Armenia?
Prime Minister Pashinyan has already talked about that possibilities. He believes that if the opposition groups, particularly those who are pro-Russian, come to power, they will refuse to pursue the ongoing peace process and eventually to sign the peace treaty. And from his perspective, in his opinion, it is a call for another war. And he said that even in a matter of months, the relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan would collapse and lead to another war. So that's how they analyze the situation. They foresee the aftermath of Armenia's potential refusal to sign the peace treaty. We believe that if Pashinyan succeeds to win the elections, he will most likely sign the peace treaty. At least he is saying that he will sign the peace treaty. Armenia has already prepared the draft of the new constitution, and Prime Minister Pashinyan said that there will be no reference to declaration of independence, which has territorial claims against Azerbaijan. So all these developments show that Prime Minister Pashinyan is likely to sign the peace treaty if he wins the elections. But it is not clear what position the opposition groups would take if they win the elections. And if they refuse to sign the peace treaty, of course, it will be the collapse of the peace efforts that have been gaining momentum since particularly Washington summit of August last year. And it can lead to escalation, confrontation. I hope not another war, but the collapse of the peace process can have unpredictable consequences.
Okay. So how might initiatives such as the proposed bridge, peace bridge, reshape connectivity and trust building measures between Azerbaijan and Armenia in practical terms?
Since August last year, since Washington summit, Armenia and Azerbaijan have taken a number of initiatives to consolidate the peace process, to make it irreversible. And one of the very important elements in this context is, of course, launch of the cooperation in a variety of spheres, including humanitarian exchanges at the civil society level, expert level, and this has already started. And this month we are waiting the arrival of Armenian civil society representatives again within the program of Peace Bridge, as you mentioned. These are very important to make sure that the peace efforts and also the achievements of peace are reflected also in larger segments of the society. It is not just confined to high-level political interactions, but it is reflected also at the societal level, at the level of civil society experts, and also in particular business, economic initiatives. And this process is ongoing. It is taking new dimensions every month. It is no longer breaking news to say that Azerbaijan exported some petroleum products to Armenia, or third countries are using Azerbaijan's territory to export some products to Armenia. It is no longer breaking news. It has become a matter of routine, and it is already the success of the peace process. And it shows that it is gaining momentum. It is affecting many aspects of Armenia-Azerbaijan relations. And just imagine that if Armenian government change the constitution and they signs the peace treaty, it will have very significant implications for peace and prosperity and also economic integration in the South Caucasus.
My final question in regards to what you just said then, what role could regional partners, including Kazakhstan, for example, who's expressed an interest in projects like TRIP, play in supporting long-term economic integration and stability in the South Caucasus?
It is very important for Armenia and Azerbaijan that TRIP project is not viewed as an isolated project of the two countries. From the very beginning, it has been presented as a project of regional importance, as a project that can contribute to connectivity between Europe and Asia. It is not only just a matter of Armenia-Azerbaijan relations. And at the moment, it is very important that we observe already other countries are expressing interest in the TRIP project. they are trying to take a role and to participate in its development and in the future in its operations. And from that perspective, it was a good news. We heard from Kazakhstan side that they want to take part in the implementation of TRIP project. And it shows that TRIP is considered as an initiative that can upgrade the capabilities of the middle corridor, can contribute to connectivity transportation between Europe and Asia, and particularly against the background of developments in Iran and also in the southern maritime routes, the importance of the middle corridor is increasing. And this is the reason why it is no coincidence that we see more countries are expressing interest in middle corridor as well as in the TRIP project.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much for joining me this morning, Mr. Vasif Hasanov. Thank you so much. Now, over to Turkey, and President Tayyip Erdogan has spoken with his US counterpart about the fragile ceasefire with Iran as Ankara urges restraint and pushes for a lasting settlement. The call comes amid cautious optimism following the announcement of the truce. Here are the details.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan held a phone call late Wednesday with US President Donald Trump to discuss the fragile ceasefire with Iran. In the phone call, Erdogan warned against any actions that might undermine the truce, according to Turkey's communications directorate. Erdogan also told Trump that the ceasefire, which was brokered by Pakistan, represented an important opportunity to reach a permanent peace agreement. Earlier the same day, Erdogan had welcomed the ceasefire, saying it should be fully implemented on the ground without leaving room for what he called provocations or sabotage. The ceasefire, announced earlier this week amid escalating hostilities in the region, has significantly reduced cross-border strikes, although tensions remain high. However, disagreements have emerged over the scope of the truce, especially as to whether it applies to Lebanon. Israeli officials have said that hostilities involving Hezbollah in Lebanon are not covered by the ceasefire, while Iran and others say the agreement should include all fronts linked to the conflict. The uncertainty has raised concerns that continued exchanges of fire along the Lebanese front could undermine the broader ceasefire. Turkey, for its part, has called for restraint across all theaters, warning that any escalation could jeopardize diplomatic efforts. In a related development, humanitarian assistance from Turkey has begun reaching Iran. 3 Turkish trucks laden with medical supplies crossed into western Iran on Wednesday through the Gurbulak border gate in Turkey's eastern Ağrı province. According to state media, the aid convoy was organized by the local health directorate in the Turkish city of Van. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Now, Syrian Foreign Minister has said that the Four Seas project could turn Syria and Turkey into a key energy corridor, linking major regional waters. Here's more on the report.
Our strategic relations with Turkey are increasingly developing. In Ankara, we have found a reliable and committed cooperation partner. We aim to further strengthen stability through this, and at the same time, we are engaged in extensive cooperation with brotherly Turkey in areas such as energy, trade and infrastructure, thereby eliminating all threats. Another aspect of this cooperation is the energy issue between Syria and Turkey. Cooperation in the Caspian Sea, the Mediterranean and other regions will also increase. The projects we will implement here are of great importance for both countries. The rebuilding of the country's institutions is progressing rapidly, and I should also note that the first parliament will begin in Hasakar. Thus, the first session of this parliament will be held in the near future. I would also like to reaffirm once again that we remain fully committed to the agreement between Syria and the SDF, and accordingly, all arrangements regarding borders and oil fields are being implemented.
It's now time for a break. When I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Don't go anywhere. Hello, you're watching Daybreak on A News, and if you're just joining me, I'll be taking you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Trump accuses Iran of doing a very poor job over oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz. Russia announces Orthodox Easter ceasefire. And US First Lady Melania Trump strongly denies any links to Jeffrey Epstein. Now let's take a look at the stories making the front pages, and we head first to a news website in regards to some deadly things that happen over the English Channel. So at least 4 dead after migrant boat sinks in the English Channel. Now 4 people have died when they were making their crossing from northern France after attempting to board a boat to take them across to the English Channel. Now 2 men and 2 women died after they tried to board a water taxi, and the currents, which can be very dangerous alongside here, swept them away. The Pas de Calais Profiteer said at a news conference, adding that the death toll was still provisional, that they were still getting numbers. They know that 38 people were rescued, 3 of whom were treated as emergency authorities, including 2 children taken to a nearby hospital as well as a precaution. Now the boat continued its journey towards the UK, carrying around 30 people. We will get more information from that, and if we have any further updates, we'll definitely let you know. Now let's head over to our second headline this morning, and that's in relation to Artemis II, and that's on CNN's website, and that's in regards to the team now coming home. Now, they are heading back toward Earth, with 4 astronauts having travelled around the far side of the moon and gone further into space than any human has travelled before. The journey marks the first time humans have left Earth's orbit, which was done the last time that was done was in 1972 by the Apollo 17 mission, and also represents the first times for an African-American astronaut, a woman astronaut, and a non-American astronaut from Canada, respectively, on this journey. So let's do a bit of a recap. Right now, we've got a nice picture of what happened on day 1. So the spacecraft Orion travelled from low to high Earth orbit, is what you're actually seeing now. Remaining rocket parts separate from the spacecraft, and then the crew executes docking demo, preparing for the translunar ejection. Now, on day 2 to 5 is Orion's main engine fire, setting it on a path, as you can see, heading to the moon, and crews test communications through deep space network, and spacecraft enters the lunar sphere of influence. Now we head over to day 6, which was the key day in regards to lunar flyby observation. As you can see there, it goes just around the moon. So the lunar flyby and observation begins, and Orion makes the closest approach to the moon. The mission reaches its maximum distance from the Earth, and then we go to day 7 to 10, which is where we are at right now. And then Orion begins its journey, as you can see, heading back home to Earth, completing its unprecedented figure-8 path. Crew conducts a manual piloting demonstration, as well as spacecraft maneuvers towards the re-entry to Earth and the big splashdown, which we're all very much looking forward to see. Now, this was a 10-day mission which took off on the 1st of April and marks the planned return of humans going to the moon and eventually establishing a lunar settlement. Well, I just want to give you that update, so we'll give you more as they splash down later on today. It'll be probably later on this evening, but it'll be great to see exactly how that all unfolds. Now let's go to our next headline, which is actually on the Guardian, the New York Times website, in relation to what's taking place in Iran and the war there. Israel agrees to talks with Lebanon but keeps striking Hezbollah. So just a bit of an update, but we will be covering this story in depth throughout the course of the programme and with a guest later on. But Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says there is no ceasefire in Lebanon and will continue to strike Hezbollah with force. Now, Iranian officials have called these strikes against Lebanon a violation of the ceasefire, but Donald Trump says that the Israel and Lebanon conflict is a separate skirmish in regards to what the ceasefire deal actually brought to the table. Now, the US Department official have confirmed that talks between Israel and Lebanon, they will schedule and host a meeting next week to discuss an ongoing ceasefire negotiation with them in regards to that as well. But we do know that on Wednesday, Israel increased a number of strikes and it's killed more than 300 people. And that's according to Lebanon's country's health ministry, and wounded over 1,000 people. Now, in relation to the Strait of Hormuz, we know that Trump has said that Iran's handling of the oil ships through the Strait of Hormuz is not what the agreement has, is what they discussed. He's saying they're not doing a very good job. And he also mentioned that they should not be charging, as there were rumors that they could charge ships to pass through the key waterway in relation to the Strait of Hormuz, which we've seen has had a major impact on the economy. So far, only 7 ships have passed through in the last 24 hours versus the normal amount of roughly 140 ships, and that's down to ship tracking data. Now, we know that the next thing to come is the US delegation, which is set to meet with Iranian officials in Pakistan and US officials tomorrow for talks in relation to the strikes in the region and the ceasefire, the 2-week ceasefire as well. But we have more information on this, so let's go to our Washington correspondent, Ubay Shambada, with more.
President Trump is not happy that Iran appears to not be fully complying with the ceasefire terms, which require it to fully reopen the Strait of Hormuz to all commercial shipping. Trump accused Iran of violating the ceasefire agreement and not allowing oil shipments to cross the strait. Only a handful of vessels have crossed the Strait of Hormuz since the ceasefire between the US and Iran came into effect. President Trump also posted on social media his concerns that Iran is attempting to charge massive fees to allow ships to cross the Strait of Hormuz. Trump said that Iran was being, quote, dishonorable, and that any attempts to coerce payment for ships to cross the strait must come to an immediate stop. New reports have emerged on how Iranian-backed proxies in the region have reportedly come close to ambushing American diplomats in neighboring Iraq. In a statement on Thursday, the U.S. State Department said that a group of U.S. diplomats were ambushed in Baghdad on Wednesday by Iranian-backed extremists. No casualties were reported. The ambush came after hundreds of similar attacks in recent weeks against American diplomatic facilities in the region, as well as an abduction of an American journalist in Iraq who has since been released but was previously held by Iraqi militants. The State Department called on the Iraqi government to take immediate steps to dismantle Iranian-backed militant proxies operating outside of the government control in Iraq. Ubi Shabander, A News, Washington.
Israel is intensifying its offensive in Lebanon, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying there'll be no ceasefire as strikes continue. Even as Israel signals openness to talks, Hezbollah rejects negotiations, raising fears the conflict could widen. Here's more on that information.
Israel is escalating its military campaign in Lebanon and making one thing clear: there will be no ceasefire. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Thursday that Israeli forces will continue striking Hezbollah targets until security is fully restored in the north. His statement comes just hours after a massive wave of airstrikes across Lebanon, with around 100 targets hit in a matter of minutes. Lebanese officials report more than 300 people killed and over 1,000 wounded in the latest attacks.
Following repeated appeals from the Lebanese government to enter into peace negotiations with us, last night I instructed the cabinet to open direct negotiations with Lebanon in order to achieve 2 goals. 1, the disarmament of Hezbollah. 2, a historic sustainable peace agreement between Israel and Lebanon.
But there is a major obstacle. Hezbollah has already rejected direct talks and clashes are continuing on the ground. The crisis is also spreading beyond the region. The United States and Israel say a wider ceasefire deal does not include Lebanon, while Iran insists it does, raising the risk of broader escalation. A conflict intensifying on the battlefield and a fragile path to diplomacy just beginning. Since early March, nearly 1,900 people have been killed and more than 6,000 injured, according to Lebanese officials. At the same time, a diplomatic track is emerging. Netanyahu says Israel is ready to begin direct negotiations with Lebanon, with talks expected in Washington next week. The goal is to disarm Hezbollah and move toward what he calls a historic and lasting peace.
Now, the United States delegation is set to meet with Iranian officials in Pakistan on Sunday for talks as continued strikes in the region test a tenuous ceasefire. Pakistan brokered a 2-week ceasefire between the US and Iran on Tuesday, pulling off a diplomatic victory after more than 5 weeks of war tied to thousands of deaths in the Middle East. Joining me now to discuss this is Kaiser Nawab from the Chairman Belt and Road Initiative for Sustainable Development in Islamabad. Welcome to the programme this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. My first question in regards to this, will the recent Israeli attacks on Lebanon get in the way of the scheduled talks tomorrow? Could this hinder progress to ending the war?
Yes, this is a very significant challenge which can be seen while happening such important talks in Islamabad. The defense minister has already expressed his expression in his tweets about these attacks, because these attacks are just happening when such an important talks are occurring after such a long diplomatic processes, and the talks that happened between both of the parties by the Pakistani government and Pakistani authorities.
And who do you think will have the upper hand in the talks between Iran and the US? Will the US likely decide to compromise on a number of deals, or do you think that the US has achieved its main objectives throughout this war? How do we interpret what could happen tomorrow?
So I think this is very premature to mention about that, because one side is the superpower, another side is also a country that shows a very good resilience and also showed their power during this war. And I think Pakistan cannot be, and we as a Pakistani cannot predict which hand will be the upper. And if there is a situation like this, I don't think so something will be coming to the midpoint. We believe that as a mediating country, I mean, things should be flexible from both sides, and the intention should be very good from both sides. But there are quite good number of challenges as well, including for Pakistan as well, being a mediator.
And Iran has sent over its 10-point plan, as well as the US has sent over its 15-point plan, but the two do not align in relation to that. Could you find that they're going to be a stalemate, stuck in the middle, not able to come to some middle ground? How do you think that could go forward?
I think this is a very challenging moment for Pakistan itself, again, to bring both the parties on common grounds. Both, as you mentioned, are in different ways. But once they are meeting and the dialogues happen, I think many things cannot be mentioned on the media and might not be in those points as well. Some points are for the public, and some such points are really very indoor, and I believe that this talk will make it successful, and there will be some common grounds which will bring both the parties to deal with peace, and I think to deal with a win-win cooperation.
Well, Pakistan is definitely going to be the highlight, because obviously that's where these key talks are going to be hosted in Islamabad tomorrow. But Pakistan has been able to be a peacemaker between the US and Iran. However, within its own borders, this is not actually the case, because China has positioned itself as a mediator between Afghanistan and Pakistan in relation to the conflict going there. And the two countries have now agreed to explore a comprehensive solution to ending the conflict. Why do you think that has taken this long? Some might actually argue that Pakistan needs to resolve its issues within its borders before deciding to go and meddle within the Middle East and sort out what's going on between Iran and the US. Do you think that's a fair statement? What's your thoughts on that?
So look, this is an international relation, and many people have a problem, including Pakistan, has a lot of issues with some countries, particularly with India. Of course, we have an issue with Afghanistan just recently, but we have a long-lasting relation with Afghanistan as well. We are a brotherly country. There's a lot of Afghan refugees since many decades, and China has successfully tried to host these talks in Xinjiang, in Urumqi recently, and we have a very genuine stakes in those talks as well, and we have concerns while Afghanistan soil is used against Pakistan by proxy terrorism and terrorist groups, which are mostly funded by our neighbor India. And I believe that we need to solve that at that point. But yes, in current situation, what Pakistan placed its position, and I think Pakistan has already achieved a significant diplomatic success by this 2-week ceasefire, which become a headline all over the world, including in India itself as well. So I think still the real test now is whether Islamabad can turn this fragile truce into a permanent and peace, which is quite challenging for Pakistan itself as well. So I think rather than that Pakistan has its own issues, yes, we do have issues. We wanted it to solve it. We wanted it to solve it through dialogues, and we will do it. We are very willing to do that. That's one of the reasons that we were sitting with the Afghan Taliban in China. But I think we have already played our role, not only in the region, but for the global community. So if you just see the Twitter or all those social media threads, Pakistan has received numbers of phone calls, messages, so many appreciations from all over the world, from all continents. But it's challenging as well. We agree to that while bringing such a big, the powers to the table and to mediate between them.
And because Pakistan has decided to take this mediating role, do you think that obviously there's a number of challenges with that? Do we think that there'll be more follow-up talks? Obviously, the world is watching in regards to what could happen tomorrow, but it seems that this is quite a complex situation. How much involvement will Pakistan have between the two nations?
So as you mentioned, it's a very complex, and I think it's very interesting situation as well, because one of the most important and critical question emerged during this talk is that, can a relatively weaker country, we do have very much problems as well, including financial and economic issues inside Pakistan as well. They can broke between such a global parties. There is a very famous proverb that meaning all the strands, no matter how many, eventually come together around one central thread. But again, the question is, how strong is that central thread, which I mean is Pakistan. That's in international politics, peace doesn't come only for good intentions, what we assume. It also lied and tied to power, influence, and the biggest thing is the trust. So I think when a country like us with limited diplomatic leverage and or on issues as well, we are bringing two major powers to a table and helping them to reach a common consensus is a massive challenge, follow-up as well. But history has also shows sometime relatively a smaller and a weaker countries can become acceptable platforms because their neutrality, geographical location, or maybe moral credibility. So Pakistan is trying to be a right place for that, and so far it's the right place, and hopefully the Pakistani diplomatic approach and the leadership will also do the follow-up. But again, the biggest question and concern is how can Pakistan guarantee that? One side is the United States, another side we see the attacks in Lebanon, and so these are such of the issues which I personally view that that will be quite challenging for Pakistan to follow up on that.
Yeah, definitely.
As a guarantor or as a mediator.
Yes, no, definitely. And it's something that the whole world will be watching. So the platform is now over to Islamabad and the stage begins tomorrow. So thank you so much for your contributions, Mr. Nawab. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we are hopeful for a peace and a sun that rises and that the day that goes with a message of peace to the world. Islamabad itself means peace, and Pakistan means a land of peace. And I think hopefully we will be a headline again soon. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Now to the UK, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is continuing his Gulf tour with high-level talks aimed at reinforcing the fragile ceasefire between the US and Iran. Our correspondent from the UK brings us more.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has travelled to the United Arab Emirates on Thursday, the second stop of his Gulf tour after Saudi Arabia, as efforts continue to secure the US-Iran ceasefire. In Abu Dhabi, he held fresh talks with regional defence chiefs on reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The meeting, chaired by the UK's Chief of Defence Staff, Sir Richard Knighton, included defence representatives from the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, Oman, Iraq and Egypt. Starmer told those attending that the ceasefire between the United States and Iran was welcome, but warned it remains fragile and requires continued international effort to halt. He stressed that the UK had been pushing for de-escalation throughout the conflict. Some of those attending had participated in the virtual military planning meeting chaired by Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper on Tuesday for around 40 nations to discuss how the Strait of Hormuz could be kept open after fighting is over. The Prime Minister's visit has also taken him to Bahrain, where he met British forces and again stressed that there is still work to do to secure the ceasefire and protect global energy flows. Zaina Farizadeh, News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Turning to the war in Ukraine now, and Russia has announced a temporary ceasefire for the Christian Orthodox Easter holiday. It is set to last from Saturday evening through to Sunday night. Ukraine says it will also observe the pause. The announcement comes as the two sides continue limited contacts and exchanges.
Now, an urgent message from the Kremlin. By decision of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, a ceasefire is declared from 4 p.m. on April 11th until the end of the day on April 12th.
Russia has announced a temporary ceasefire in Ukraine to mark Orthodox Easter, a 32-hour pause in fighting set to last from Saturday evening until Sunday midnight. The Kremlin says all military operations will be halted across the front, while troops remain on alert to respond to any violations. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Kyiv will respect the ceasefire. In a post on social media, he said Ukraine had repeatedly called for a pause in fighting during Easter and is ready for reciprocal steps. Zelensky also stressed that civilians deserve a holiday without threats and urged Russia not to resume attacks after Easter. Despite the announcement, fighting has continued in several regions. Ukrainian authorities report multiple attacks in Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia, regions with casualties, damaged homes and fires following shelling. On the diplomatic front, contacts between Moscow and Washington are continuing but largely behind closed doors. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says discussions are taking place informally and confidentially, with no clear timeline for renewed formal peace talks. Meanwhile, both sides have carried out another exchange of war dead. According to Russian sources, Moscow returned the bodies of around 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers while receiving 41 Russian servicemen in return.
US First Lady Melania Trump has strongly denied any links to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, calling recent claims false and defamatory. In a surprise speech at the White House, she gave her remarks denying any connection. Here's what she had to say.
I never been friends with Epstein. Donald and I were invited to the same parties as Epstein from time to time, since overlapping in social circles is common in New York City and Palm Beach. To be clear, I never had a relationship with Epstein or his accomplice, Maxwell. My email reply to Maxwell cannot be categorized as anything more than casual correspondence. My polite reply to her email doesn't amount to anything more than a trivial note. I am not Epstein's victim. Epstein did not introduce me to Donald Trump.
Mexico's state oil company says it has put out a fire at its Dos Bocas refinery with no injuries reported. The blaze broke out at a petroleum coke storage area where around 150 emergency workers were deployed. The cause of the incident remains unclear and the company has not yet provided details on the extent of the damage. The fire comes less than a month after a deadly incident at the same refinery, raising concerns over safety at one of Mexico's largest energy projects. Now, Venezuela's National Assembly has approved a new law aimed at attracting foreign investment into the country's struggling economy. The legislation allows private and international companies to develop gold and other strategic minerals under long-term concessions. Under the law, the state retains ownership of resources while introducing taxes and arbitration mechanisms to reassure investors after years of nationalizations. Officials say the reform is designed to revive the sector and stabilize Venezuela's economy. You're watching Daybreak on A News. Over to a quick break, but don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. Now, we're going to turn over to something a bit different. Now to arguably what one of the most famous women of her time, Queen Elizabeth II. And it's her iconic style that a new exhibition in London is showcasing. A display of over 200 items from the late Queen, marking decades of royal fashion and the centenary of her birth today. Let's take a look at this.
A new exhibition at the King's Gallery is offering a rare and intimate look into the life of Queen Elizabeth II through the clothes she wore over nearly a century. Titled Queen Elizabeth II, Her Life in Style, the display marks 100 years since her birth. More than 300 items from her personal wardrobe are on show, making it the largest exhibition of her fashion ever staged. Over half of the pieces have never been publicly exhibited before. The collection traces her life from childhood to her final years, reflecting not just changing styles, but also her role as a global figure.
In thinking about the Queen's fashion legacy, I think it really amounts to two very important things. Firstly, throughout her life, she supported British fashion design on the global stage, and that's seen in so many pieces in this exhibition. But secondly, her unique style has really inspired many contemporary designers, both in the United Kingdom and abroad. And we hope that the importance of this archive will continue to be recognised and used as a source of inspiration for the designers of the future.
Among the highlights are her 1947 wedding dress, her 1953 coronation gown, and iconic pieces such as the aquamarine tiara and the Burmese ruby tiara. Even the dress worn by her stunt double during the 2012 London Olympics opening ceremony is being shown for the first time. Curators say the exhibition brings together the work of designers who collaborated closely with the Queen over decades, illustrating her lasting influence on British fashion.
The really special thing about this exhibition is being able to present such a comprehensive and rounded perspective on the Queen's relationship with fashion, from sketches, personal correspondence, archive items, as well as the beautiful clothing itself. What I really hope that visitors will take away is an understanding of how the Queen used fashion to fulfill her role, her intimate interest in the production of her clothing, and also how this collection can be a source of inspiration for designers both in the past and in the future.
For those working behind the scenes, the garments carry a more personal connection. Textile conservators describe moments of discovering traces of her perfume still lingering in the fabrics, offering a powerful reminder of the person behind the public image. Running from April 10th until October 18th, the exhibition presents not just a royal wardrobe, but a human story told through fabric, memory, and time.
I think there's well over 200 pieces in there. Normally looks like there's 400 pieces of dresses. That looks amazing. How many dresses or hats can one woman have? I mean, it's endless, but thank you so much for joining me this morning and throughout this week. I'll be back on Monday to take you through the rest of the stories. Just to let you know, we have the Hungary elections coming up over the weekend, and we'll be bringing you the outcome of the talks between the US and Iran in Islamabad tomorrow. So don't go anywhere. Stay tuned to A News.